What's really cool about life is whatever we get out of it, right, is the result of what we put into it. And so I guess I would say it this way. If you were to look into a mirror and you see a reflection in the mirror, right? And let's say that reflection looks angry, right? You wouldn't look at the mirror and say, you got to change. That's a reflection of who you are. You have to change. So if the circumstances in your life are not what you want today, don't blame the things on the outside. Take a look inside and find out who you need to be. Find role models out there that are getting the results that you want. Find out what they're doing, their strategies, their syntax, their belief systems. Do the same things to produce the same results.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I'm really excited to hear Scott Duffy unpack his journey with us from sales training to sports to the internet and helping build online platforms for some of the major channels we're all familiar with, to jet charters with Richard Branson, Business and Burgers podcast, working with Inc. and Entrepreneur magazines, and now AI Mavericks. And also a little nod to EO. I was in a little incubator for EO when I lived in Houston, and it's a great organization. So, Scott, thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you. Well, I'm a huge fan as well. And this is our first conversation, but I'm excited for what's to come.
Yeah.
Let's take it back. How did you get your start? Did you know that you wanted to go into sales? Did you always have this innovative and entrepreneurial spirit?
Well, it's a funny question. So when I was 18, I was a freshman in college. One of the best pieces of advice I got from a family member was on the first day of school, go to the career counseling department and meet the person who's in charge and tell them that you want to get a great internship at the end of your freshman year, like going into that summer. And so that's what I did. I went in, I met this guy. We built a great relationship over time. And back then, if you really hit a home run, you get an internship at like IBM or FedEx or Xerox. Like those are the big brands back then. And so one day he calls me. And he's like, Scott, I got this. You got to come in. I've got it. So I'm thinking to myself, I've hit the jackpot. It's got to be like one of those three big companies. And I end up going in and we sit down. And so I said, who is it? Is it like Microsoft? Is it like, I'm all excited? He said, no, it's AAA student painters. And I'm like, what? He said, AAA student painters. I said, I don't understand. He said, look, here's the thing. What I've learned about you in the short time I've known you is you are like an entrepreneur through and through. And he said, instead of putting you in a big company, I want to put you with a company that is going to give you the chance to learn how to write a business plan and build a business and really mentor you. You'll be like a franchise owner effectively for one of their things. So I started my career painting houses, and it was almost by accident. And, was it a great experience? It was, because I learned so much. On the other hand, I probably did everything wrong. I learned a great lesson at that time. There's really two ways you can do things: trial and error or modeling. And the problem with trial and error is it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money to figure it out, versus modeling, where you find people out there that are getting the results you want. You find out what they're doing, their strategies and syntax and belief systems. You do the same things to get the same results. I try to reinvent everything. Mm-hmm. And instead of really finding the right models out there and just doing that. So I think that was a great lesson at that time in my life. Yeah.
But that is definitely not the story I was expecting when you're talking about these big companies. But it sounds like it really did help you. He helped nurture who you already were instead of try to put you into a box and have you get into a situation that so many people get into, where you have a career at a major organization and then you wake up one day and go, wait, what am I doing here?
Well, it's funny because at that time, just the idea of having somebody call me an entrepreneur was something that was like, it was almost like a foreign idea, because it's hard to understand, probably, especially for young people today. But, 30 years ago, the path that we were all told that we were supposed to go on was to get good grades in school, right? In elementary school, so you can go to a good high school, get good grades so you can go to a college, get good grades so you can get a great job. And it always led to a great job. And back then, the idea of being an entrepreneur was something that most people really stayed away from. In fact, I remember when I wrote my first book that Penguin published, I learned that you never put the word entrepreneur at that time on the cover of a book because it is absolutely a death sentence for that book. Because at that time, people looked at entrepreneurship as something that was just so risky. It was like at that time, Donald Trump or Richard Branson, you risk everything was the perception. And most people didn't want to do that. And so over time with technology and tools, it became a lot easier. Entrepreneurship became a lot more accessible, which is really awesome. And I'm really grateful that that person saw that in me back in the day.
How did you go from painting houses to working in sales training with Tony Robbins?
So that's kind of a crazy story too. So I went to University of San Diego. Right? That's where I was doing my student painting. And in my third year, so it was my junior year, we had this tradition back then where after midterms in the fall and in the spring, everybody get in their cars and we drive 9 hours south of the border to San Felipe, Mexico. And it was it was so much fun. It was it's just huge, crazy party. And in my third year, I got done with my stuff early and I was one of the first to kind of head down and I was going to set up. And it was about 90 miles south of the border in Arizona, Calexico, Mexicali. Yeah. And when you're on these old federal highways, the way they were designed is you'd have one lane in each direction. And then there's just desert as far as you can see. And I was cruising. There were 4 of us in the car. I was in the passenger seat. And then there were 3 other people. I wasn't driving. And we were cruising down one of these roads. And for some reason, and I don't know if it's flooding. I'm not sure what it is. There'd be a rise in the road. And then there'd be a big drop on each side. And then it would just the road would work like that. Anyway, a car or truck had gone off the side of the road and didn't see us and we didn't see them and popped up. But when we hit this car square on, going 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. And it was literally the worst day of my life. And the question I always ask people is this, how many times in your life have you been going down a road and maybe you're doing everything right? Maybe in a business, you have the perfect idea. You built the perfect team. You put together the perfect, you executed flawlessly. And then something came out of nowhere and it knocked you off course. And everything you did up to that point, every email you wrote, every text you wrote, call you had to start over. You had to throw it all out and start over. And that's really what happened to me. So I ended up having 2 brain hemorrhages. It was a crazy journey. They got us back to the States. And while I was recovering, I had to drop out of school. And while I dropped out of school, something really, really awesome happened. What happened was my roommate's father was really into motivational tapes. And so for all of the young people listening, so a tape, an MP3, so we used to listen to these cassette tapes. So what he did is he came in one day and he said, my dad thinks you should listen to this. And it was a motivational book on tape. And before you knew that, I had a library and I got totally obsessed. And when I started to feel better, I decided I wanted to go and intern for anyone that I listened to. And at that time, San Diego was the Silicon Valley for speakers. Everyone was there. And so the first person I applied to intern for was Tony Robbins. And I was young. I was 20. He was 30. But instead of an internship, I was given this really cool job. And I remember one day, because we talk about lessons, I remember one day we were at this event in Seattle. And I said to Tony at lunch, I said, I don't know if you actually remember or know how I got here. I was having the time of my life and this thing knocked me off course. And I kind of had to start over. And all that stuff, but it brought me to you. And he put his hand up. And if you've ever been around Tony Robbins, he's a big guy. He's 6'7". When he puts his hand, you can't miss it. And he put his hand up and he said this. He said, Scott, in life, you have good days and bad days, but you don't know which is which until sometime way down the line because you don't know what you're going to make of that experience. And I think in my life, in my business, I found that to be so true.
Wow. What an impact.
Yeah. I was fortunate because I think at a really young age, I had an opportunity to be around people that had gone through extraordinary hardships and figured out how to repackage those things in their mind. I think what I learned is this: the most amazing thing about life is it like has no meaning. Nothing in life has any meaning other than the meaning that we give to it. So you could put the same problem on the table, right? And one person looks at it one way and another person looks at it a different way, right? They interpret it and they associate or they attach different meaning. And so I think that what I learned is that, about this incredible sense of possibility. It does not matter what has happened to you. If you can redefine, you can repackage that in a way that drives you forward. That's where real power is. And so I think that was a really cool thing to be around, when I was a young guy.
100%. And that took you full on into the world then of sales and building this new world of the internet. We were talking about, we were both in San Francisco at the same time. I was working on the magazine publishing side where Business 2.0 was birthed and other publications, and you were fully immersed in helping.
Was that John Batille? Does that name sound familiar? Was he around that
name doesn't. Chris Anderson was the founder of Future. Yeah.
Chris Anderson. Yes. So, we were, for everybody listening, we didn't even know it. We were neighbors. We literally lived right down the street from each other. And we just found this out. Yeah.
So you you took all this great experience that you'd received.
Yeah.
All the sales training. And then you took it into sales and you parlayed that into manager roles, VP roles, building businesses from the ground.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was, kind of interesting how that happened. And kind of, I think I framed things with some of these stories, particularly because I know some of the people listening are going to be in college or, they're kind of just getting their career started. Others might be looking at new things. And, the path to, from where it is that we are today to where it is that we want to be is almost never a straight line. Right. And there's so many things that happen along the way, along the journey. And I think sometimes where we get stuck is when we think there's only one way to get from here to there, right? And so when I went from what I was doing in training to tech, it wasn't a straight line at all. So like I had gone off the road. I lived in Houston. We talked about Houston. I lived in Houston for a little bit working for Tony. And I had this job where I was on the road and I would travel from city to city and I do workshops and seminars and things and promote Tony's events or try and get him to go into a company and do some private consulting. It's a long time ago. And after a while, I just burned out. And so I went home. I'm a young guy. I'm in my early 20s. And I went to work at a bar, right? So I'm working at this bar. It's called Chillers. They made these like awesome, like slushy drinks, a ton of alcohol. It was so much fun. But I decided I want to do something more. And I got hooked on tech. And so I always really loved technology, but I'm like, and so a friend of mine calls me one day and he goes, "Hey, Scott, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm not really doing anything." And he goes, "Awesome." He said, "You're going to come work with me." I said, "What are we going to do?" He said, "We're going to start an internet company." I said, "What's an internet company?" He said, "What does it matter? You just told me you weren't doing anything." So, so the internet first became like commercial, meaning, think about it this way. Mark Andreessen, the first kind of internet browser in Chicago, that was like around October of 1994. Netscape formed in December of 1994. And that was like the first browser. It was the first, like, today think of it as Chrome or Safari. The first time anyone was able to go in and interact with the internet, which had been around for 25 years. In the same way that ChatGPT launched not long ago, but AI had been around for almost 70 years. There was like a really simple consumer application. So I said to my friend, I said, "Okay, cool, let's do it." So we started an internet company. And the goal of the internet company was just to get people on the internet. So you'd be at home and you'd be like, and you could, okay. It was a total disaster.
Oh no.
It was everything about it. Nobody knew what we were talking about. We didn't know what we were talking about, but I got exposed really early to some really cool stuff going on. So like the guys that started Yahoo, they were working on a project at Stanford and I saw that. Guys at Carnegie Mellon and Alta Vista and things like that. And I decided I want to be a part of this. And so what I would do is I left my buddy, went back with the thing, and then I would take my tips and then when I wasn't working, I would drive up to the Bay Area and I would sleep on my friends' couches. It was like all my fraternity buddies from college. I'd sleep on their couches and I'd try and get a job. And I'd sleep on that couch and I'd try and get a job. And then eventually, after about 6 months, I kind of ran out of friends and I ran out of couches. And I remember maybe one of the hardest days of my life. And here's the thing. In our lives, we're going to be in hard times. And 2 things I've learned of this. Number one, never make your biggest decisions at your lowest points. Never make big decisions at your lowest point. And 2, we all have good days and we have bad days, right? The difference is how we assign meaning and repackage those things in our mind in order to try and help pull us forward. So on this day, it was a really crappy day. I couldn't get a hold of anybody. They were probably not picking up my call. And I ended up, pulled over to the parking lot. It was a rainy day. I pulled over, you'll know this, in Foster City at Oracle in a parking lot, which now it's a parking lot. Back then it was a dirt thing. And I just started sleeping in my car there, right? And I was doing everything I possibly could to figure out how to get up there. And then finally, right around that time, I got a call from someone in my family, and they said, we don't know what it is you're doing. Our family has a business. We throw away that dream and come back and work in this stable thing. So again, you have to make a decision. And my decision that day was to get in the car. I drove home. I went into my room. I took everything that I had to a pawn shop in Santa Monica. And I pawned everything. I pawned my high school ring. I pawned my basketball. I pawned a bracelet that a girlfriend had given me in high school. I had a Rolex watch that I bought when I worked for Tony Robbins. I pawned that. I took the money. I paid my rent. I went to San Francisco the same day. I wasn't even there for 24 hours. And the thing is, my point about all of this is that the path to getting there may never be a straight lining, right? But the question is, how much are you really willing to give for the thing that you want the most, right? If you have a dream, you got to chase that shit down like it is the last bus of the night. And that's, I think, what my message is.
And that's something you think a lot of people don't realize when they think about starting their own business.
Yeah.
Just our paths. I'm, nearing 50, and I feel like I finally know what I want to do when I grow up.
Yeah.
And my path has definitely been meandering, but it's a really beautiful journey when you look back at those points. And so much of what you're saying is really resonating with me. And I will also say, having been on the Intuit campus earlier this year or late last year, people are still living in their cars, but they are actually employed at all these tech firms. They just can't afford to live there.
They can't afford to live there.
So you were there without the job, but then you went back up. What happened next?
So, I mean, what do you do when you're looking for work, at least back then, and you got no money? So I basically went back up there. I had a couple of $100 and I got a hold of my friends. So now I've got a couch again, right? Right. I honestly, in life, if you're trying to get from here to there, what tends to happen most times is you think like, I need all the money to no, I think the way that the universe works is you get a little bit of what you need over here and a little bit of what you need over there. And that's kind of what happened. So my friends, I'm back on their couch. So that's awesome. I get a place to stay. I got a couple $100 in my pocket. So what do? I buy pizza, right? And so the idea is, I said, how am I going to stand out with the people that I want to hire me? And there's only a handful of internet companies out there. I'm going to find out where they are. I'm going to go buy pizza. When they open up the box, my resume and something funny is going to be in there, because who doesn't want to eat pizza? And if you are an entrepreneur and you're in your early 20s, you're probably broke. You can't afford to buy pizza. So it's like a win for everybody. So I went to a Domino's and I made a deal with the guy who's the manager. And I said, I will clean up if you give me the extra pizzas that don't sell, because they only kept them for a certain period of time. I said, I will clean up. And he said, you don't have to do that. They gave me this deal on pizza and I delivered it. And guess what? Somebody liked pizza. And the guy called me and he said, I don't know if I have a job for you, but if I don't, I'm going to help you to find one. And it changed my life.
Just taking that risk, thinking outside the box, thinking about what surprise and delight.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think, it's funny. I think that especially today, when people are out there trying to find a job, they're trying to find work, they're trying to get in the door when they're prospecting to do a sale, they want to do a deal. I think that what you really need to keep in mind is, number one, get out of your head and what you need and focus on what others need. And
Right.
the way you start is to be more interested than interesting. Really be interested in that other person versus interesting. The second thing is to ask the two most important questions that I think anybody could ever ask of a prospect or a customer or a potential employer. And the first is, what is most important to you about blank? And the second is, what has to happen? How do you know that you're getting what you want? So here's the example. I'm a total gym rat. And during COVID, couldn't go to the gym anymore. And I had a friend come over and he said, hey, I'm going to build an app for people like us that like to be in the gym with all these cool exercises and things like that. So it can feel like they're able to replace their workout at home. And I said, cool. He said, if I made that, is that something you'd be interested in? And I said, well, yeah, sure. And then he went off. So he asked, he asked, the first question. And he said, what's most important to you about that kind of app that I would build? My answer was this, that it's easy to use. Now, here's the problem. Easy to use means a million different things to a million different people. So he went and he built an app that he thought was easy to use. And then he came back to me and he said, hey, let me show it to you. He said, would you buy this? And I said, absolutely not. He said, but I made it easy to use. And he said, but you missed the second question. What has to happen? How do you know it's easy to use? And I said, first of all, I use an iPhone and you made this for an Android. I can't even use it. Second, I would want to pay for something one time. I don't know if I want a monthly subscription to start. I don't know if I'm going to use it. And I went on and on and on. So if you're prospecting, if you're trying to find a job, if you're talking, like you're interviewing, what's most important to you? And then what has to happen? How do you know you're getting what you want for each one of those things that they says are important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great tips. I know I could ask you so many questions because you've done so much, but I want to skip ahead a little bit to the world of AI, because you've been in AI for a while and now you have this amazing company, AI Mavericks, as well as other companies that you invest in. Yeah. So how did you make the move from tech into AI fully, just throw yourself in? And what was was AI Mavericks your first endeavor in AI, or was there something else that you did before?
No, I started a company in 2021, and it was actually built around the education space. And so, because I believe that a big part of education over the next 10 years is I understand and see the importance of the role that universities play. But even after you've graduated from a university, what's going to happen is the skills that are going to be required of a person are going to constantly be changing and needing to be updated over time. And so if you take a look at kind of, well, who does that, right? And how does that happen over time? One of the arguments that's made is that in the next 10 years, companies will become as important as many colleges in terms of educating people. So for example, if, I want to learn how to build as an entrepreneur, an online store, and maybe I'm transitioning out of a business that I'm in, what would happen if Amazon taught me a course on e-commerce, right? So I could go to Amazon Academy for e-commerce as an example. And you can do lots of examples like that. And here's the thing. So we were working through this process of building those courses, but there was one thing that we did really well. We built this market research tool that really helped us to understand what people wanted to learn and how they wanted to learn it. At that time, I was studying GPT-2 and what was going on at OpenAI. And I thought, what would happen if we automated this process, leveraged AI? Like, what would happen then? So I started a company. I went out to raise capital for it, have an amazing network and all that kind of stuff. And what happened was we were closing our round, and the week before, Silicon Valley Bank crashed. And for people who have been out there raising money, that completely changed the market last. I mean, very difficult first. But what was happening was, after my pitches, people I'd known for years would say, hey, Scott, can you stay on for a little bit longer? have your team go and we want to talk to you. And they'd say, we have a problem. And the problem that we have is none of our portfolio companies know what to do with AI. And their leaders are out there and they're trying to raise money now too. And we want them doing that. Could you create a framework to help our companies understand how to develop an AI vision, a strategy, and a roadmap, right? How to communicate what that plan is to their boards, investors, and teams. And I kept hearing the same thing, right? And I think that the message that I want to communicate right now is when you are an entrepreneur and you're in the process of going from 0 to 1, from 0 customers to your first, right? The most important thing that you're going to do is listen to the market. I was talking to Gary Vaynerchuk, to Gary Vee about this. I asked him the question, I said, what do you think the biggest mistake is that entrepreneurs make today? And he laughed and he said, there's so many. I said, well, pick one. And he said, it's this. They disrespect the market. And I said, what does disrespect the market mean to you? And he said, to me, what that means is they go and they go with their teams and they build something they think is really cool that everyone needs and they push it out. But before they push it out, they haven't talked to anybody. They haven't talked to customers, to prospects, and they find that they're way off, right? So in this case, when I was going from 0 to 1, what I heard from investors was, we have a different problem that's more important for us to solve right now, and we will pay you today if you can solve it. And I heard it so many times that what I did is I turned it into its own event series and consulting business and things like that. And sometimes it's hard to make that pivot because as an entrepreneur, right, you're putting everything into your baby. And so it's hard sometimes to get out of your story that you've been telling yourself in your head about how great it is and accept the feedback that you hear and move into something different. And so that's how I got into this whole thing. It was by accident. It was through failing that I got into this because I listened to what people actually wanted at the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I could not agree more that that's a problem we always fall into because we get really excited about the idea that we have, but we forget to listen to the voices around us, to do the market research, make sure that we are actually unique in the marketplace. That we're offering something that will solve a problem for people. Yeah. And here's the thing. One of the other things I've learned in life and in business is not every problem is made to be solved. Just because a problem is big and obvious doesn't necessarily mean that the market cares. Okay. So I'll give you an example. I had a business. It was I started it. It was like Expedia, but for private jets. Okay. And I sold it to Virgin, then ran it for those guys for a couple of years. And one of the things of several things that we wanted to do is we wanted to solve what's called an empty leg problem. Yeah. So what most people don't understand is one of the reasons it's so expensive to fly in a private jet is if you fly on American Airlines and you fly from LA to New York, well, that plane, once it lands, is picking up a bunch of other passengers and going somewhere else. It doesn't stop. On a private jet, what happens is it flies from LA to New York, it drops you off. It flies back to LA empty. It flies back to New York empty, and it picks you up. That's how it works. So you have two empty legs. And what we said was, wouldn't it be amazing if we could sell those empty legs and do it at a discount? And what happened? What happened was somebody bought an empty leg really cheap. And they broke a jet airplane's door handle. That door handle was $7,500 to replace. That was more than the cost of that cheap flight. What we learned is that owners of these private jets didn't care about the empty leg problem because they didn't want people flying more on their planes and potentially creating problems. So I think not every problem is meant to be solved. And again, you just really have to the market. If a problem is so obvious and it's been around for a long time, I want to challenge you to find out why nobody else has solved it. There's probably a really good reason. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, AI. What are some things that people need to learn or know about AI in this moment? Because it changes every day. There's new tools coming out. We're talking about that as well, how difficult it is to get funding and There are some great tools that aren't getting funded because they're not one of the big, 5 tech companies. What are your thoughts on that?
So I would say that the number one thing that you can do is use ChatGPT. That's it. I mean, the number one thing, I threw a conference in May and I had a billionaire, I had multiple $100 million companies, I had all these venture capital firms, private equity people. After the conference, we did feedback. The number one most requested thing that people wanted out of that group was hands-on training on how to use ChatGPT.
Oh my gosh.
That's where the market is. What I want to share with everybody is there is a perception because of how much attention the media throws and social media throws at AI that every company is using AI.
Mm-hmm.
In May of this year, so just a couple months ago, only 6% of companies in America used AI. 6. We are at the very beginning of this. And the reality is most of the tools are so hard to use. They're so unintuitive because they're so new. They'll be great, but you got to give them a couple of years. Same thing happened with the internet, right? Mm-hmm. Unless you're an engineer, it's really hard to use a lot of this stuff. But what is easy? ChatGPT. If you want to learn how to use ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT. You want to learn how to build a custom GPT, ask ChatGPT how to do it. That's what I would do, is just continue to talk to ChatGPT and get really comfortable in what it can do. That is the number one thing that I would recommend. Every day, you're going to hear about different things that launch, tools that launch. It's just noise. If you could become certified in a couple hours on how to use ChatGPT, I guarantee you it will be the most valuable thing that you have on your resume today.
It's a great piece of advice, and it seems so simple.
It's so simple. It's so. Wait, can I tell share another story?
Yes, please.
Because you mentioned simple. Okay, so this is how simple it is. So when we lived, you and me both were up in the Bay Area. I was invited to this venture capital conference, and it was on the Big Island of Hawaii. And you weren't allowed to say that you were going, who else was going to be there. And you signed this like NDA thing. And I remember I got there, and the first thing they did is they check you in. And they gave everybody a different color. I think it was a different color shirt. Yeah. And the people with a different color shirt or had a number or something, that made up your team. And that first day after you checked in, your team was going to go on an 8-hour scavenger hunt around the Big Island of Hawaii. And so I start looking around for people on my team, and I see Bill Ty, like famous venture capitalists. I see Sarah Lacey, like an iconic writer up there. Dick Costello, he ended up running Twitter. See all these people. We can't find the last person. And I turn around, and I literally bumped into him. It was MC Hammer.
Oh my gosh.
The rapper and the dancer. Yeah. And by the way, the incredible entrepreneur. And so we end up, and we go to the first clue, and I remember it was like this stuff, and there's Stain and me and Dick and Bill Sarah. We can't figure out what it is. And Hammer was like over there, and he's talking on his cell phone. He's having I walk over, and I say, Hammer, would you help us out? And he goes, yeah, give me the clue. And I gave him the clue, and he read it. I think he read it one time. And he's like, do this, 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 and this. And he dropped the paper. Like he literally dropped the mic. And we went to the second clue. And Hammer got that too. I think we had 8 clues that day, and I think MC Hammer solved like every single one of them. And that night we were at the bar, and I said to him, I go, Hammer, I said, that was amazing. I said, how did you do that? And he said, and I'll never forget it, he said, you entrepreneurs are all the same. He said, you start with a simple idea. You start here, you want to get there, and you make everything so damn complicated in between. And he said, I live my life by a very simple philosophy. I always try and find a way to the simplest path first. The simplest path to increasing your value in today's job market is to be the bomb at understanding how to use ChatGPT. It's that simple.
That's our mic drop.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, this has been such a fun and wonderful conversation. I'm looking forward to many more. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have everybody go to scottduffy.com, which is all things including your upcoming AI Mavericks conference. So will you tell us a little bit about the conference?
Yeah, sure. So we have a conference, AI Mavericks. You can go to aimavericks.ai. And basically, our room is filled with a bunch of founders, CEOs, it's leadership teams that are building cool companies, or they have great companies, and they're just trying to figure out how to implement AI inside, right? And most of the people today that we work with, they're stuck between this fear of missing out and the fear of jumping in. Like, they don't even know where to start. And a lot of these people, like last year, they signed up for every AI email newsletter. And today, the first thing they do is delete all of them because they're like so overwhelmed. And what we do is really simple. We just help to demystify AI and share with you what you need to know today. We help you to build a strategy. We teach you how to build a strategy and a roadmap for your business. And we put you around an exceptional and insanely great group of people that work collaboratively to like help you to get there. And that's what we do. 2 days, October 21st to 23rd, San Diego.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really excited to join you there and learn more and meet some amazing people, as well as meet you in person.
Yes.
Scott, any final words of wisdom? I think you gave us some really big ones, but do you have a motto or some words that help you get through every day? Or just one more thing?
One more thing. Okay, so I think that I would say it this way. You know, what's really cool about life is whatever we get out of it, right, is the result of what we put into it. And so kind of, I guess I would say it this way. If you were to look into a mirror and you see a reflection in the mirror, right? And let's say that reflection looks angry, right? You wouldn't look at the mirror and say, you got to change. That's a reflection of who you are. You have to change. So if the circumstances in your life are not what you want today, don't blame the things on the outside. Take a look inside and find out who you need to be. Find role models out there that are getting the results that you want. Find out what they're doing, their strategies, their syntax, their belief systems. Do the same things to produce the same results.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing some of your wisdom. And, you know, I just really appreciate this conversation, appreciate you. And
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to this episode and learning from the amazing Scott Duffy. I'll be back again with another amazing guest to share their story, their journey, and some words of wisdom with you. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbandamplified.com.